Hello, everyone. Assalamu alaikum. My name is Hafsa Zubair, and I manage communications, public affairs, and CSR for Bayer in Pakistan. I'm really happy to be part of introducing the aptly named H2O Stories podcast series, which is a collaboration between Tayaba and Bayer Pakistan. This is actually following a collaboration that happened between Tayyiba and Bayer Pakistan in 2021, where Bayer Pakistan funded the distribution of 2,000 H2O water wheels, which Tayyiba provides to water scarce communities in Punjab and Sindh. So that's a project we were very excited about and very happy to be a part of. And we'll tell you more about it shortly. But for now, over to Misha from Tayyiba.
Hi, everyone. My name is Misha Khan, and I'm the manager for blockchain and research and communications here at Tayaba. So, this podcast series will talk about a new and interesting H2O story every time you tune in. But we decided to launch this on none other than World Water Day because it just seemed so appropriate. World Water Day to me is just a day to appreciate and be grateful and to count our blessings if we're one of those very few people who have access to water as quickly as a millisecond required to open a tap. What do you think, Hamza?
Yeah, absolutely. Exactly, Misha. I think World Water Day is such a great time to start this conversation, actually, because I think, many of us, we're living in urban centers and in the developed world, and we really are detached from the reality of water scarcity. A lot of us, I think, including myself until very recently, don't realize how immense a problem it is. And, also how quickly it's accelerating because I can't even imagine living without access to water. I know I have a bottle of water right here on my desk, and I take it for granted that water will always be there.
Yeah, I think we all take water for granted, actually. That's the case even in a country like Pakistan, where we all experience the reality of water scarcity firsthand to some degree. That dreaded situation when, someone who says in the house, oh, we're running low on water. So, like, don't do the dishes or don't run the shower. It's an inconvenience for sure, but still, it doesn't come close to the reality of water scarcity that thousands of people face, actually.
Absolutely, yeah. And you're right, and that actually leads us right into the focus of today's podcast, and that's the example of the case study that we want to share with the audience today. I think it was a really powerful and moving illustration of just how immense the problem of water scarcity is. If you want to tell us a little more about it.
Yeah, actually. This particular case study takes place in a village in India. But before we get into it, I think it's really important to say that, water scarcity is a harsh reality for countries like India and Pakistan. But, it's a global problem. It happens in many parts of the world.
Right. That's true. So, The Water Wives of India, that's the title. And it's certainly a title that got my attention when I first read it. And I'm sure our listeners would love to understand more about who these water wives are too. So, could you tell us a little more, Misha? What does
Well, to be honest,
water
when I
wife
read the
entail?
name Water Wives, I didn't know what to think at all. Disclaimer, I also read a lot of dystopian sci-fi literature when I can. So to me, Water Wives just sounded like something out of one of those novels, actually. But since I mentioned dystopia, I mean, objectively, I think when I start telling you a little bit more about the case, it does seem at least a little bit dystopian to me. So, in a nutshell, the story here is that in a small village called Dengamal in Western India, men marry multiple women. But here's the catch, they don't do it for the money or to bear children or for any other more conventional reasons. It's just because of water.
Wow, that actually sounds surreal. Tell us a little more. Why? How is it because of water?
Well, I mean, they literally marry to meet the needs of their family, to meet the water needs of their family. In fact, men have married up to 2 to 3 additional women in many of these cases to manage the household's water requirement. So now, like, polygamy isn't an unfamiliar concept in a country like Pakistan, in a Muslim country. But in India, polygamy is banned for the Hindu community. So, it's worth considering what sort of factors drive people in these villages to enter into polygamous relationships, despite all of those restrictions.
Wow, I think yeah, dystopian is absolutely the right word. And it sounds so difficult to comprehend. But I can't help but wondering how this affects the women. How do the wives take to such an arrangement? Especially if it's not a common practice culturally for them. I'm sure it's an even more difficult or challenging adjustment for the women to make.
Yeah, right. So, yeah, definitely. I think that's definitely a question worth asking because in some of these documented cases, it's usually the wives who give their husbands the permission to do so, actually. And, it makes sense if I walk you through what a day in the lives of these women is like. You understand some of the motivations behind their decision making. If you think about it, they have to manage their household chores like cooking and cleaning, their caregiving responsibilities, and on top of that, their water collection duties. And what's the common factor in all of this? They're all intensive physical labor tasks. And even if a person was to do it all, and they do, eventually what happens is they succumb to some form of chronic illness or physically debilitating conditions. And it's just not a sustainable amount of physical labor, which is why the practice isn't uncommon for villages like Dengamal, as you think. So, and Dengamal is just one of 19,000 villages in that area alone with lack of access to water. So I think the real question to ask is how uncommon the practice probably really is, for these people in these areas.
That's a good point. I mean, it sounds strange to us and it sounds almost surreal to us, but if that's your reality, then it makes sense, I guess. And the need for extra help doesn't seem difficult to imagine at all. But I guess I would still really wonder what sort of a home dynamic they have. What do the second and third wives not mind being added on as additional labor essentially? And it doesn't seem like anyone is making a secret out of the motivation for these marriages. So, if anything, what are these water wives gaining from such unions?
So, considering that these villages are so heavily patriarchal, you would assume that it's a completely one way exchange, right? But to a certain degree, that isn't true. The water wives are often widows or single mothers, and I think in most patriarchal societies, women lose their associated high status when they become divorcees or widows because they no longer have that male title to associate with. In urban settings, maybe things are changing slightly, but in small villages, these women are still regarded as social pariahs. So for them, these marriages are a way to regain respect in their communities, gain shelter and support for their children. This is what communal living is at the end of the day, division of labor based on very, very localized circumstances and specific
Hmm.
contexts.
Okay, right. So, I mean, you mentioned that at one time it's common for these men to have up to 2 to 3 water wives. Um, so that sounds like a lot of extra people. And do you think the situation is really that dire where that many extra people are needed to fulfill one household's water requirement?
Well, the situation definitely is dire. The job of these water wives have become so essential to the survival of entire families and generations. Every year, the extreme heat and low monsoon levels in these areas mean that wells close by have either dried up or just cannot be relied upon for a regular daily water sustenance or to fulfill their water needs. So, like in these drought conditions, the trek for water collection can even take up to 12 hours every day. And knowing how heavy these containers can get on the way home, the labor is just so physically taxing. And even though we've been talking about India, I'd just like to point out that the water collection woes here are equally shared, especially in rural Pakistan and desert areas where the supply is already so limited. When we first heard about the water wives, actually, we asked our partners and colleagues on the ground if they've noticed something similar happening here. And they agreed almost instantaneously, but had always just failed to mention it because it was just so much of a norm and just like a regular occurrence for them.
Wow, that's incredible to think about. But okay, so the utility aspect aside, let's just talk about how gender plays a role in these sorts of crisis situations, right? Because we've been talking about a scenario where there's a drought or a lack of water availability in these villages, and it really is a crisis situation, right? Because you need water for your daily life, and that water insecurity has led to these sort of creative solutions. But it's so often that in these situations, it's women who you see losing out the most, right? Just take the sheer physical aspect of it, the labor aspect. These are the women. The women are the ones expected to cook and clean and raise their children and clean the house, and that alone is a full-time job. And like you said, it keeps you on your feet all day. And then we forget that there's a high birth rate. Giving birth to multiple children takes such a toll on a woman's physical health too, especially in rural areas where healthcare is limited. So you add to that hours of trekking in the heat with in search of water, and then carrying that water, which is very heavy. So it seems like the division of labor calculus often ends with add more women to the equation, and it doesn't seem fair. What do you think?
No, I completely agree. These journeys aren't easy to make at all. I mean, the terrain isn't always travel friendly. The heat, like you said, the humidity and the heavy water containers women carry on their heads or shoulders, it all adds up. Research and our own experience with these communities show that women responsible for fetching water were more likely to report pain in multiple areas of the body, including their hands and upper back, head, chest, abdomen, feet. So the repeated stress put on the body from carrying water and the pain it causes may also contribute to long-term disabilities or, musculoskeletal diseases. Also, like these journeys expose women to all sorts of dangers like abuse and attack. So I definitely agree that women lose out the most, especially when it comes to the water collection issue. I mean, we just have to look at the world stats for this. So each day around the world, women and girls spend 200 million hours collecting water. This is each day. And 200 million hours is an insane amount of time. So that sort of time has an opportunity cost, especially for young girls who are out collecting water rather than getting an education. Women often complain about the hours spent collecting water, and like how those hours could be spent pursuing financial opportunities like handicrafts or taking up extra work. So yeah, I completely would agree with you.
Wow, that's just those figures especially are just staggering. And if you really think about it, it's almost hard to imagine to compute. But so, this year's World Water Day is all about making the invisible visible. And, so you've explained some of the factors, the physical health, how physical health of women is impacted by this uneven distribution, water collection duties. So I think let's also then discuss the emotional well-being. I read an article, a Tribune article about suicide in Sindh, in Thaparkar specifically, and it was pretty jarring to come across because um, it was the article quoted that a majority of those who committed suicide are women, and usually average rates globally show more men than women, ending their own lives when it comes to suicide. So this article listed, poverty, lack of resources as some of the major reasons. And how much do we know about how do you think lack of water availability ties into this?
It's always difficult to know these things for certain, but it wouldn't surprise me if much of the woes associated with resources actually, was basically due to lack of water, because like water is the ultimate resource of life. So fulfilling the daily water needs of the household is a stressful job, especially when there is very little certainty or control over the water resources. You never know, some days you're going to head out and if you're going to find even a drop of water. Sometimes wells completely dry up, and some days, no matter how far these women trek, they just aren't able to connect enough water. So the chronic pain of carrying that, along with just like the stress element of just having to make those journeys, and like keeping in mind the element of abuse, attack, and sometimes ungodly hours at which they have to return. So yeah, and on top of that, with these women who have like a limited supply of water, and then they bring this water home, and then the last aspect, and I think the most stressful one, is any impending abuse awaiting them at home from like the male patriarchal man of the house, just completely accusing them of failing to essentially do their job. So it's all a snowballing effect, I think.
Yeah, that's really, really terrible circumstances to be in. I can completely understand that must be very, very difficult to put up with day in and day out, and knowing the situation is not going to change. The daily struggle of these women seems almost unimaginable, and also something which maybe in the past couldn't have been avoided. But so one of the things Tayaba has been doing is doing some very impactful work to help specifically women like this, especially in rural areas, with their water collection challenges. So I think this would be a great time to bring Bilal in, and ask him to tell us something about first about himself, of course, and then a little bit about Tayyiba's interventions.
Assalamu alaikum, Hafsa. Assalamu alaikum, Misha. Thank you very much for
Assalamualaikum.
being here. I'm really enjoying the conversation that's going on with regards to the water crisis and how organizations are coming up with innovative solutions and partners to alleviate the suffering of water-deprived communities.
Well, I, for one, always love hearing about Tayaba's founding journey. It's such a heartwarming and personal tale to me. So, before you get into anything else, Bilal, I would really love for you to walk us through how Tayaba came into existence.
In 2016, I visited Burkina Faso and witnessed the water rollers being used by both males and females for water transportation. My time there as an observational researcher and as a social entrepreneur made me really understand deeply the benefits of this simple intervention like a water wheel, and that really stuck with me. And when I came back to London, I did some more research and I found out that there were similar initiatives being happening in India, but there was nothing in Pakistan. So, with a burning desire to lead an impactful life, I got together with a few like-minded individuals, and we wanted to design this H2O Wheel, which is an innovation that eases the accessibility, storage, and transportation of clean water while unlocking economic opportunities for the water deprived communities and especially females.
Okay, Bilal, this is great. This is fantastic. Can you tell us a bit about what Tayyiba does exactly? How does Tayyiba fit into this picture of water scarcity?
So what we do is we focus on the water transportation issue, where we've designed a wheel which is called the H2O Wheel, Help to Others. And it's a very simple yet effective piece of machinery. It's an alternative method of transporting water where instead of just filling a barrel of water or instead of just filling out water pots or jerry cans. Here you just fill that wheel and you attach a handle to it, and you can carry up to 40 liters of water. I mean, to give you an analogy is that instead of you dragging on your suitcase, which we are allowed to carry up to 32 liters whilst traveling internationally, you were asked to kind of carry that on top of your head. To the airplane, into the airplane, and this is where this is like the closest sort of example where everyone can perhaps relate to it, and we take that load off their shoulders and their head, and we give them this wheel, which saves them the time, gives them more opportunity in terms of utilizing that time into any other economic activity. We've seen that in areas where women have to travel across long distances to fetch water, they develop chronic pains, chronic back pains, and all of this is kind of changed or when they use this wheel. So this wheel, this H2O wheel, is made out of UV stabilized polythene and food gradable material. So we also take in consideration that we look into the recycling of this wheel as well once this is damaged. And because it is made out of this UV stabilized and food gradable material, we are able to recycle it as well and be part of the circular economy.
Fantastic. No, it's such a simple innovation and such a great idea. But Bilal, so Misha and I spoke a little about this in the beginning. But can you give us more context about, the scale of the problem of water scarcity in Pakistan and the plight of these families that don't have that access to water?
I think no one is unaware of the water scarcity issue in Pakistan. As you guys were mentioning earlier, that I think everyone has a first-hand experience on what a water crisis could look like. And you just have to kind of Google water scarcity in Pakistan, and the statistics which come up are jarring in themselves. Pakistan, I think, ranks the third amongst countries facing water shortages, and it's predicted that we'll face an acute water crisis by 2025. And I think in Pakistan, more than 21 million people lack access to clean water at home, and this is the most basic need for human survival. And I think that within Pakistan, women in these water deprived areas pay the highest and the heaviest price when it comes to water prices. Uh, and we've kind of tried wherever we can with partners like yourself to kind of help and cushion these communities. When we kind of tested our beta with the H2O Wheel, with an ad hoc intervention in Mitti in Third Park, the plight of these people became extremely visible, where women and children in this region had to travel for 7 to 8 kilometers every single day to fetch water. And once we had given this wheel to them, the change in their life was quite evident. And I think this is where we are at the moment, and our vision is to kind of change as many lives as possible and help as many water deprived communities.
Right. So since then, actually, Tayaba has come a very long way. We've got like a robust needs assessment process, in collaboration with grassroots level organizations. We've piloted in all the regions and provinces of Pakistan, actually, from, like the mountainous north to the south, South Punjab and Sindh. Tayaba has been able to address the unmet need for access to water, actually. In fact, Tayaba and Bayer's partnership has actually been very effective in addressing this sort of a crisis as well. Hafsa, why don't you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, thanks. No, I mean, I think that's the thing. At Bayer Pakistan, we're very happy and very pleased to be part of this really, really important cause. And, we're aware it's a small drop, as it were, but, still for 14,000 people, plus more, indirectly who've been affected by this particular, intervention that we funded and that Tayaba has executed. I think I've been there myself, thanks to you guys, thanks to the Tayaba team, and seen on the ground in Punjab, in the district Hasapur, what the situation is like. And then, of course, also in, Umerkot and Tharparkar, where these 2,000 wheels were distributed in last year. So, the fact is that the reality on the ground is plainly visible when you're there. And I think for Bayer, we're very happy to be part of this, intervention. It's a small step, of course, but that's how it goes. We all try to do our bit, and I think for a company like Bayer, this is extremely important because we have all kinds of commitments to sustainability. We have all kinds of commitments to people in the communities where we live and work, and this line aligns with the UN SDG goals, including good health and good health and well-being. And it really is, an important step to go towards ensuring water availability for people. Because, like you said, if you don't have water, everything else is basically, not sustainable. Their life is not sustainable. So yeah, we're very pleased with this, and we want more people to know about this initiative, and also just the general issue of water scarcity and what a challenge that is, and how we all need to sort of do our bit to help it before it gets even worse, which is it's accelerating very, very fast. So yeah, I think it was really interesting to hear this particular case. And glad to know that we are a very small part of providing solution.
Right. No, thank you so much, Hafsa and Bilal, for your wonderful input on the issue. I think we're heading towards the closing time for our first podcast now. So I would just like to thank everyone who listened for tuning in. We really hope that you enjoyed the riveting tale of the Water Wives and hopefully learned something new. And I would also like to take an opportunity to thank our partner Bayer for making this podcast happen and for helping Tayaba get one step closer to actualizing our goal of water accessibility and water security for all. We would love to hear from our lovely audience, actually. So, drop by in the comment section and tell us what you think about the podcast, any pledges that you want to take or may have already taken for World Water Day. And, if you like what you heard today, please do share with your family and friends. I think that's all from me. And Bilal, why don't you sign us out with a nice message on World Water Day?
I think everything we've discussed today should really send home the message of how valuable a resource like water is. This World Water Day, let's extend our hands in helping others with the H2O wheel, so we can kind of cushion their everyday struggle to survive when it comes to water fetching activities. Water is the source of all life on this planet, and it is truly heartbreaking that so many people have limited access to it. So I urge all of our listeners to look up a local water-based charity and donate today. In fact, do it right after this podcast's end. And the purpose of these discussions is to build actionable empathy in our viewers. So go ahead and make this day count.
All right. I think this was a great discussion. Thank you, Mishra, for having me on, and thank you, Bilal, for sharing all your thoughts. As I said earlier, I think has been a great collaboration between Tayaba and Fire Pakistan, and we've been very happy to be a part of it. I hope that there will be more of these interesting H2O stories to come, and I hope you will tune in next time. Thank you for joining us.